Feast of Passover and unleavened bread was the next day. Chief priests and the scribes were seeking how they might arrest him by treachery and kill him. For they had been saying, "Not during the feast, lest there be a riot among the people." And on that day, Jesus was in Bethany, in the home of Simon the leper. And as he was reclining for supper, a woman came with an alabaster vase of ointment of pure nard, very expensive. And breaking the neck of the jar, she poured it over his head. Now there were some there who were angry among themselves, and they said to one another, "Why was the ointment wasted like this? It could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why are you attacking her? She's done a beautiful thing for me. For you will always have the poor with you, and whenever you want to, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me." What she could do, she did. She anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever in the whole world the gospel is proclaimed, what she has done will be told in memory of her. And Judas Iscariot, the one of the 12, went from there to the chief priests in order to hand him over to them. And when they heard it, they rejoiced, and they promised to pay him money. And he looked for the best time to hand him over. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Passover lambs are sacrificed, his disciples came to him and said, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He sent two of the disciples. He said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a jar of water. Follow him, and wherever he enters, you say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher says, where is my guest room, where I am to eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large upper room, furnished, ready. There prepare for us." So the disciples went out. They went into the city, and they found it just as he had said. And they prepared the Passover. Now when it was evening, he came with the 12. And when they had reclined and were eating, Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They began to be sad, to say to him one after another, "Could it be me?" He said to them, "One of the 12, one who is dipping bread with me in the bowl. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better for that man if he had never been born. And while they were eating, he took bread and he blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And he said, "Take it. This is my body." And then taking a cup and having given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. He said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, poured out for many. And truly, I say to you, never again will I drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, "You will all be offended and run away. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I've been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." But Peter said to him, "Well, even if all of them are offended and run away, not me." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you, you today, this night, before the cock crows twice, will deny me 3 times." But he said vehemently, "Even if I must die with you, I will never deny you." And they all said the same thing. And they came to a place, to a garden called Gethsemane. And Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And taking with him Peter and James and John, he became deeply distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is sorrowful, even unto death. Remain here and stay awake." And then, going a little farther, he fell on the ground. And he prayed that if it were possible, this hour might pass him by. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible to you. Take this cup from me, but not what I want, but what you want." And he came back and he found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Simon, sleeping? Couldn't you even stay awake 1 hour? Wake up and pray that you may not enter into the test. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away again and prayed, saying the same words. He came back again, and he found them sleeping, for their eyes were weighed down, and they didn't know what to say to him. He came back a third time, and he said to them, still sleeping and taking your rest. It's over. The hour has come. The Son of Humanity is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up. Let's go. Look, the one who hands me over is at hand. And immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders with a crowd armed with swords and clubs. Now the betrayer had given them a sign. The one I kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away securely. And coming right up immediately, he went right up to Jesus and he said, Rabbi. And he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of them, who was standing by, drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus answering said to them, have you come out as against a robber, an insurrectionist, with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple, teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this is happening in order that the scriptures might be fulfilled. And forsaking him, they all fled. There was a certain young man who was following him, clothed only in a linen garment over his naked body. And they seized him. But leaving the linen cloth, he ran away naked. So they led him away to the house of the high priest. And all the chief priests and the scribes and the elders gathered together. And Peter followed at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he was sitting with the guards, warming himself by the light of the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin sought testimony against Jesus in order to put him to death, but they couldn't find any. For the witnesses gave false testimony, and their testimony did not agree. So there were some who stood up and gave false testimony, saying, we heard this man say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days I will build up another, not made with hands. But even so, their testimony did not agree. So the chief priest, the high priest, stood up in the middle and questioned Jesus, saying, have you no answer to make? What are all these things they're testifying against you? But Jesus was silent and said nothing. So once again, the chief priest questioned him, and he said to him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Humanity seated at the right hand of power and coming from the clouds of heaven." The high priest rent his robes, and he said to them, "What need do we have for further witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. How does it appear to you?" They all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him and to say to him, "Come on, prophesy." And the guards led him away, slapping him in the face. Now, meanwhile, Peter was down below in the courtyard. And one of the maids of the high priest came, and seeing him warming himself, she went up and she looked at him and she said, "Hey, you were with that Nazarene, Jesus." But he denied it. He said, I neither know nor understand what you mean." He went out into the gateway, and the cock crowed. And the maid, again seeing him, began to say to those who were standing by, "He's one of them." Again, he denied it. And after a little while, those who were standing there said to Peter, "Surely you're one of them, for you are a Galilean." And he began to put himself under a curse and to swear, "I do not know this man you are talking about." And immediately, for the second time, the cock crowed. And Peter remembered the word that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will 3 times deny me." And beating on himself, he wept. So immediately, early in the morning, the chief priests, the elders and the scribes and the whole Sanhedrin, having made a plan, bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. And Pilate questioned him. "Are you the King of the Jews?" And answering him, Jesus said, you are saying? The chief priests accused him of many things. So Pilate again questioned him, saying, well, have you no answer to make? Look at all these things they're testifying against you. But Jesus answered not one thing. So that Pilate wondered. Now, at the feast, he used to release to them any one prisoner whom they asked. And there was a man in prison whose name was Barabbas, who was bound with those who had committed murder during the insurrection. And coming up, the crowd began to demand that he observe the custom. And Pilate answered and said to them, what do you want me to release for you, the King of the Jews? For he had figured it out, that the chief priests had handed him over out of envy and jealousy. But the chief priests were able to incite the crowd to ask instead for Barabbas. And Pilate, answering, said to them, well, what then do you want me to do with the one you call King of the Jews? And again, they shouted, crucify him. Pilate said to them, what crime has he committed? And they shouted vehemently, crucify him. And so Pilate, wanting to satisfy the crowd, handed Barabbas over to them. And having flogged Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers led him away into the courtyard, that is the praetorium, and they called together the whole battalion. And they clothed him in a purple robe, and they put on his head a crown woven of thorns. And they began to salute him. Hail! Ha ha! King of the Jews! And they beat his head with a stick, and they spit on him, and bending their knees, they paid mock homage to him. And when they had finished mocking him, they stripped him of the purple, and they put his own clothes back on him. And they led him away to crucify him. They compelled a passerby, one Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, who was coming in from the fields, to carry his cross. And they carried him to a place called Golgotha, which means the skull place. They offered him wine mingled with myrrh. But he did not take it. And they crucify him, dividing his garments among them by throwing dice on them to see who will get what. And it was the third hour. And they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two insurrectionists, one on his right and one on his left. Now those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "Ah, ha, ha! Hey, you who would tear down the temple and build it up again in 3 days. Save yourself and come down from the cross." And the chief priests likewise mocked him among themselves with the scribes, saying, "He saved others, but he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we might see and believe." And those who were crucified with him reviled him. When the 6th hour had come, a deep darkness descended over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani." And that means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Now, some of those who were standing there heard this and said, "Ah, look, he's calling Elijah." And one of them ran and filled a sponge full of sour wine, put it on a stick and held it up to him to drink, saying, "Ah, wait, let's see if Elijah will come and take him down." But Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And the centurion, who stood facing him, when he saw how he died, said, "Truly, this man was Son of God." And there were women who were watching from a distance. And among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the Younger, and Joseph, and Salome, who had been with him when he was in Galilee, had followed him and had served him there, and many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem. Now, since it was evening, on the day of preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, came. He was also looking for the kingdom of God. And taking courage, he went into Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Well, Pilate wondered if he was already dead. And summoning the centurion, he asked him if he'd already died. On learning it from the centurion, he granted the corpse to Joseph. And he bought a linen shroud. And he took him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud, and laid him in a tomb that had been carved out of the rock, and rolled a stone over the door of the tomb. And Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. And when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome went and bought spices so that they might go and anoint his body. And getting up very early on the first day of the week, they went out to the tomb as the sun was rising. And they were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the door of the tomb?" But looking up, they saw that the stone had already been rolled back. Now it was a big stone. And going into the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right hand, clothed in a white robe, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "Don't be terrified. You're looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He's been raised. He isn't here. Look at the place where they laid him. But you, go. Tell his disciples and Peter. He's going before you to Galilee. There you'll see him, just as he said to you." But going out from the tomb, the women fled. For trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone. For they were afraid.